Okay, so this week I thought I'd start a new project, a new theme, which is looking at textures. Okay, so I thought this could go for a week or two, but we could also run it into the next project if you wanted to. So the one after this is really on the theme of derelict, or anything that's derelict. So that's what I've got planned for the next few weeks. So the derelict theme we did a few years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody asked if we could do it again, so I thought that's quite a nice one. So these were, I'll show you a couple of these that were some of my demos from that one. So this was like using like derelict cars, things like that. But it also, I thought it also ties in quite nice with the texture theme. You've got things like use some quite thick paint here. This is sort of using some splattered paint. Thinner kind of almost like glazed paint, and then yeah, so that's that one. This was another one from that theme, and again this was sort of using a palette knife and seeing some of the colour from the paper through and other bits obscured. So that's a few examples of that. I brought various old demos in, quite a few actually. So this one, it was painted with a palette knife, and I actually started with a bit of collage. So that little bit there is a bit of newsprint. So sometimes that can give you different qualities than if you just worked on a flat page. So that's one idea, is to start with some sort of either a stuck down collage or a textured base. So that would be one idea you could go for. Quite often like at the end of a painting session, I just stick the bits of paint that's left over on the palette on a bit of board. And I'm thinking, well, that might be quite a nice base to sort of paint over the top of. So I've occasionally done paintings in that way. So this is just leftover oil paint, so I might try and use that as the basis of another one. This one was a very simple seascape type demo using palette knife. And with this one, I think I used oils, and I basically sort of put paint on, then scrape back. So you've got some of the colour of the board underneath, and some of the brush marks showing through. And I quite like that. This was a little demo I did of a bit of a barn, again using palette knives, but this time on a canvas, so you're getting little bits of the grain of the canvas showing through in places. So that can be, one use of texture, one way you can use texture of the canvas underneath in the ground. And again, this is not a palette knife one, just one of the lead boats. So using the palette knife, both, I've got quite a few palette knives here if you want to try out. So it's sort of slabs of paint, but also using the edges of the knives just to sort of create sharp lines. So that's what we did with that. Something interesting. Again, another palette knife example, but this time still life. And this one was using, again, a piece of canvas, but I went for like a pink underpainting and then palette knife over the top, but just left a few little bits of the pink shining through. I thought that can look quite vibrant, and particularly if you've got a contrasting colour, like green and red being complementary colours, so you've got very vibrant contrast. So I think that was from one of my photos of Holly was. But again, using palette knives, pretty much all painted with palette knife. Some slabs of paint, some bits where it's picking up the texture of the canvas and it just gets a little bit grainy. So
what was that on for, can I ask?
Yep, sorry.
What was that on, that last one?
This is it's just actually a bit of canvas that's stuck to this board. So it's a piece of canvas. And I've got loads of this canvas if anybody wants a bit of canvas to use. These are just like what you'd have stretched over a stretcher, but I've just got rolls of this, so I just use it for demos and things. If it works out as a painting later on, I can stretch it over a stretcher. This is, I'll stop about that. So this was the last one. This is mostly brush work, but again, I've put paint on, then scratched into it, so that gives you this sort of grainy look. And then again, use the palette knife, the edges of the palette knife to get these nice sharp edges. So this is one from years ago. So it's really just to encourage you to experiment a bit more with the paintwork and making the mark with paint, using different, can be brushes, can be thin paint, thicker paint. These ones are all kind of acrylics and oils. I might do something similar maybe next session with watercolours and drawing mediums and that sort of thing. But this bit is the one I've been using as a demo. I was thinking maybe rather than make a whole painting to start with, you could just do little sections and just do little studies and not worry about it being too much of a finished work to start with, kind of work your way up to something. So that would be my suggestion if you weren't quite sure where you wanted to start. As I say, the Derelict theme, I've got a folder with 1 or 2 images in there, so if you did want to combine the two, it works quite nicely. But equally, it would be fine for anything really, landscape or anything really, the texture idea. I haven't particularly got much to demonstrate. I was just doing a little bit here with palette knife, just thinking sort of like areas like that might be quite nice to just explore to start with. So just probably getting some darker greens to start with, and then I'll add a little bit white. And as I say, I've got a whole range of different palette knives, different shapes here, so if you wanted to try them out, you're very welcome to. And then it could be some sort of lighter. And they're a bit hit and miss, they're a little bit random, but that can be quite nice in that it will give you paint effects that you wouldn't achieve in other ways. So if you like the idea of trying that, and then perhaps some using the knife on its side to get some of these sort of sharper edges showing up. Yeah, that's a bit too thick, isn't it? That's a bit like that. So it's really trying to encourage a little bit of experimenting. Anybody got any questions? Glad everybody managed to get here this week. Looks like it pretty did. Just a quick reminder though, just try and keep the cars nice and tight when you're parking, so we get everybody on. But then we manage. Great. Okay, right. As I say, I've got a couple of images here, but I will try and find a few others for the next few weeks. So if you've got anything of your own what you use, please. Attracts it. Well, it's just that big. Yeah, just do something else. Yes, please do, yeah. Yep.